there are several people in chapter 24 that are deserving of some special attention. Among these are a few philosophers and a certain group. I want to draw attention to Hobbes, and I want to draw attention to Montesquieu and Diderot and the Philosophes. But to start off with Hobbes, he was an English philosopher. He was born just outside of Malmesbury, Wiltshire, England, on April 5th, 1588. He was actually also born prematurely. His book, Leviathan, which is what he's most known for, is widely considered the greatest work of political philosophy in English. He died at Hardwicke Hall in Derbyshire, December 1679. He was reputed by many to be an atheist. Hobbes' long and prosperous life caused his enemies consternation. According to another view, Hobbes was, as he represented himself as being, a loyal member of the Church of England. The opposition to him was attributed in large part to a variety of factors, including his demythologizing attitude towards the Bible, his unsuccessful attempt to reconcile Christianity with modern science, and his defense after the English Civil War of absolute sovereignty and the civil sovereign's authority over the church. Evolved materialist philosophy is what we would call his kind of philosophy. And that's a philosophy in which all was conceived of as a body in motion, propounded, and it all propounds an ethical theory that laid the foundation of utilitarianism. He's best known for political philosophy based on the idea of social contract for purpose of security of each individual and absolute authority of sovereigns. Just to give you a list of some of his works here, some of these names are in Latin, so I'll do my best, but his works included a trilogy in Latin, which was Elementorum Philosophiae, comprising of De Sive, De Corpore, and De Homine. Then there was Human Nature, which he wrote in 1650, De Corpore Politico, 1650, then Leviathan, or The Matter, Form, and Power of a Commonwealth, Ecclesiastical and Civil. That would be 1651. The questions concerning liberty, necessity, and chance, 1656. And he also wrote on geometry and some other things as well. Now, Hobbes' philosophic system pointedly was anti-scholastic and anti-Aristotelian. And again, the scholastics were basically an invention of the Catholic Church. We find Thomas Aquinas, really this whole form of philosophy that was built upon Aristotle's philosophy. But his philosophic system was naturalistic and mechanistic. Knowledge and understanding were rooted in experience for Hobbes. His metaphysics was often summarized as matter in motion. And he was untroubled by some of the pressing problems of his day and of subsequent philosophy, including accounting for non-perceptual existence of phenomena and causation. And again, this isn't a philosophy course, so some of this stuff is probably a little more dense than it needs to be. But, he believed human beings were, while capable of reason, are driven by their passions and motivated by fear, especially of one another. They are irreducibly self-interested and will cooperate only when they believe that it is to their advantage. All this was demonstrated by Hobbes' theory of the state of nature as altogether without institutions and relationships, and as a condition in which everyone enjoyed an equal natural freedom and had the natural right to all things and no corresponding obligations or duties, leading to the famous, quote-unquote, war of every man against every man, which you can find that in Leviathan chapter 13. Hence, the description of life is that situation that was quoted above. That was his understanding of life. War of every man against every man. Above all, though, it was Hobbes' scientific materialism that rendered him an anathema. Like Descartes and other devotees of the new philosophy pioneered by Galileo, Hobbes regarded nature as a machine. But he took this idea further than anyone else and maintained that absolutely everything is physical. There are no immaterial spirits, Man's immortality begins with the resurrection of his body, and God himself is a physical being. This is what made Hobbes an atheist to practically everyone except himself. For most of history, an atheist was a man who worshipped the wrong God, not no God at all, maybe a physical God as imagined by Hobbes. But this physical God would thus, by definition, sort of cease to be God. So kind of makes you an atheist to believe in a physical God. Hobbes' idea is one of the rarest heresies in the history of Christianity, and some have actually claimed that Tertullian, one of the Latin church fathers, believed that God was physical, but the idea was aberrant to all denominations until the 19th century, when we had the rise of this American religion known as Mormonism. And like Hobbes, Mormons maintain that the Bible means what it says in the passages that describe man as made in God's image. According to Mormon theology, God the Father has a body of flesh and bones and as tangible as man's. And this is the very belief which caused Hobbes to be vilified for centuries. Perhaps he'd be more acceptable today since Mormons are not considered that obscure, at least amongst American Christianity these days, interestingly enough. Hobbes was, in fact, a preeminent philosopher and political theorist. Hobbes is best known for his writings on individual security and the social contract, while his political influence was less than that of his later opponent Locke, John Locke. His political philosophy is more highly valued, not for its conclusions, but for the manner in which he presents his argument. Thomas Hobbes is best known as a philosopher of human nature and human society. He is famous for maintaining that the natural condition of people is one of war, in which life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And he was an early social contract theorist, in that he believed that the state could be understood as the outcome of an agreement between free human beings to submit to government. So there's a little bit about Hobbes for you. Montesquieu was a French jurist, satirist, and political and social philosopher. I'll give you see if I can say his entire name. He has a long name, and it's French, so let's see how I do here. But it's Charles Louis de Secondat, Baron de Montesquieu. He lived from 1689 to 1755. He was the first of the great French men of letters associated with the Enlightenment. Montesquieu is best known for his lengthy book called The Spirit of Laws, published in 1748. In this famous work, Montesquieu examined the evolution of law by comparing a wide variety of political, social, and historical contexts. Also well known for his critique of absolutism, first suggested in the Persian Letter 1721 and more fully developed in his famous work The Spirit of Law 1748. In the latter work, Montesquieu advocated a government embodying balance and separation between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Virtue for Montesquieu meant justice, and justice required a written body of law and constitution. Hardly a Democrat, Montesquieu saw the aristocracy as the group best able to exercise restraint on monarchical power. Also known for his sociological explanations for the development of cultural difference, in which he demonstrated how various forms of political society, monarchical, republican, etc., operated according to distinctive underlying principles determined by geographical and historical circumstances. Thus, he suggests that despotic, tyrannical, government is innate to Oriental societies. But underlying Montesquieu's project was the desire to prove the existence of a universal natural law beyond historical and geographical conditions. Montesquieu's concept of man was similar to that of Montaigne. His low estimate of human nature was somewhat mitigated, however, by an indulgent and even compassionate attitude. In religion, he was a deist, and although he was basically anti-clerical, he respected the traditional Roman Catholicism of his country, and he died in the church. Diderot, he was a French philosopher playwright and novelist. His name was Denis, or I guess probably Denis Diderot, but we'll call him Diderot. He lived 1713 to 1784. He's best known as the editor of the Encyclopédie, which was a famous work among the philosophers of his time in the Enlightenment there in France. On October 15, 1713, Denis Diderot was born in Langres, Compiègne, into a family of cutlers whose bourgeois traditions went back to the late Middle Ages. As a child, Denis was considered a brilliant student by his Jesuit teachers, and it was decided that he should enter the clergy. In 1726, he enrolled in the Jesuit College of Louis le Grand, and probably later attended the Jansenist Collège de Harcourt. In 1732, he earned a Master of Arts degree in philosophy. He then abandoned the clergy as a career and decided to study law. His legal training, however, was short-lived. In 1734, Diderot decided to seek his fortune by writing. He broke with his family, and for the next 10 years he lived a rather bohemian existence. He earned his living by translating English works and tutoring the children of wealthy families, and spent his leisure time studying. In 1743, he further alienated his father by marrying Anne-Antoinette Champion. Let's see here. A French philosopher, as we've established. He was also an encyclopedist. He was a critic. He was a novelist and a playwright, an intellectual polymath and prolific man of letters. Diderot is best known as the chief editor of the Encyclopédie, which was 28 volumes long, and it's really the monument of the French Enlightenment, if anything else. In the 18th century, the world philosophe connotated a man of ideas, but also a man of action, a would-be agent of social and political change, a champion of progress. In a post-Lockean, post-Cartesian world, a number of Enlightenment philosophers embraced the exciting new possibility that nothing exists in the universe except matter. We can broadly characterize Diderot's philosophical developments as follow. Rejecting the Christianity in which he had been raised, he moved through a version of deism into monist materialist determinism. And since we've mentioned the philosophers a little here, we'll give a little bit of treatment of that group as we draw this lecture to a close. The philosophers were intellectuals, often not formally trained or associated with a university. They were usually more literary than scientific. They generally extended, applied, popularized, or propagandized ideas of others rather than originating those ideas themselves. The philosophers were more likely to write plays, satires, pamphlets, or simply participate in verbal exchanges at select gatherings than to write formal philosophical books. Within France, the battle for toleration was not led by the Huguenots and the Jansenists, as one may think. Opposition to Catholic autocracy is also emerged from this interesting group of philosophers. Now, the philosophers were moved by quite different concerns than those of religious minorities. Whereas the Huguenots and Jansenists wanted the right to worship freely, the philosophers were motivated by their belief in liberty of conscience as a natural right. They were also the most profoundly anti-clerical and opposed the power of the Catholic Church over many aspects of people's lives. The most famous case in which the philosophers became involved was that of the Calas affair. In 1762, a Protestant merchant, Jean Calas, was tortured and executed by order of the Parliament of Toulouse for the alleged murder of his son, who had converted to Catholicism. Voltaire became convinced that Calas was innocent and that he had received an unfair trial due to his religion. Voltaire's Traité sur la Tolérance, 1763, took up the challenge of Calas's case and blazoned the injustice of it across Europe. So there we have an interesting look into some of this, some French Enlightenment folks and the philosophers, as well as our good friend English philosopher Hobbes. And so there you go. That brings chapter 24, this brief lecture, to an end with a discussion of Hobbes, Montesquieu, Diderot, and a little bit more on the philosophes.